Hi, everybody. You are watching this because you are watching the Unit 10 lecture that I wasn't able to deliver in class on Tuesday, April 9th. So you're watching this lecture. This will prepare you for your next quiz on Unit 10, which is not on April 16th because SESU doesn't have Tuesday evening classes on April 16th. So that will be the following week, April 23rd. This week we are talking about probing, priming, and prompting. Okay. Basically assisting an individual in the learning process. All right. And as we go through certain examples, you'll find that if you were teaching somebody something new, you would use all sorts of prompts. And you would probe as well, but you haven't necessarily put a name to those types of prompts that you're using. The reason this matters is because when you are teaching someone specific skills in a sequential order, you might have to, or you probably would have to, strategically prompt and then strategically fade those prompts. So very often we'll use these types of prompts and differentiate between them very systematically in a clinical setting. So if you were working with adults with disabilities or kids with autism or other developmental disorders, you might be told to use a partial gestural prompt. And you would have to know what that is. So we're going through this this chapter. I want you to know that priming, I'm not going to test you on priming specifically, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on teaching you what it is, but I would like you to still read it. Probing, priming, and prompting. You definitely have to know the difference between prompting and probing. Process of elimination, if you were given in your worksheets, say in a couple weeks, 3 different examples, and you had to identify which one's probing and which one's prompting and which one's priming. By process of elimination, you'd be able to identify priming if you can accurately identify the other two. Probing. Probing is presenting typical antecedent stimuli to test if appropriate responding is produced. Okay, so if I wanted to test whether you could identify the color of my sweater, I would say, hey, what color? To see, by given this antecedent stimuli, which is me asking you the question, what color, and pointing to the color, can you identify it? And that would be a probe. I'm just testing your knowledge or your skill. So again, probing, presenting typical antecedent stimuli, which is, again, in that case, I was just asking you a question and pointing to my sweater. That's your antecedent stimuli to test if appropriate responding. Did you produce the correct response, which would be yellow or mustard, or I suppose in your camera it might look brown. Priming, establishing an antecedent response relation when the response is not under typical antecedent influence. I look at this more as the process of learning, the process of going from being prompt dependent to acquiring the skill. All right, so basically the rest of this lecture we're going to talk about prompting. Prompting is a huge umbrella term, and there are different types of prompts, and then in each of those types there are subtypes. Prompting is refining the antecedent response relation when the response has been demonstrated to be under typical antecedent influence. Tricky definition, but basically you're refining the antecedent response relation. What this means is I give you the antecedent, which is what color, and your response was not appropriate. It was not under stimulus control, we could almost say. It was not the appropriate response. So we prompt it to refine, to perfect, to improve that antecedent response relation, your response with this antecedent, what color, and you're refining that relation between the two to make sure that when given the probe, what color, you are able to demonstrate the correct response. All right, let's go into types of prompts. Okay, we're going to talk about response prompts, model prompts, and gestural prompts first. Okay, response prompts is one of our types. So we've got big umbrella here, prompts, and we're going to break that into stimulus prompts and response prompts. Let's talk about the response prompts first. Okay, response prompts. Response prompts, antecedent behaviors that evoke a response. Okay, there's a behavior that evoke a correct response versus a stimulus prompt is antecedent stimuli evoke the correct response. Okay, so and this is all assumed that the response has been demonstrated to be under typical antecedent influence, so it's incorrect. Okay, response prompts, stimulus prompts. Stimulus is when you alter the excuse me, I just scrolled to the wrong page. Stimulus prompt is when something else helps you get the right answer. Response prompt, when someone else helps you get the correct response. Okay, one more time. A stimulus prompt is when something else helps you get the correct response. Response prompt is when someone else helps you get the correct response. That's on your final note on page 111. Okay, will help you differentiate between those two. All right, so let's talk about response prompts. Response prompts. One subtype is a model prompt. Model prompt, or sometimes we might call this a formal prompt. I don't really care if you can identify formal or thematic, which one's which, but a formal prompt we might also call a model prompt. A model prompt is fully or partially demonstrating the act to be imitated. So let's say I said, I was sitting down, you're a little kid and you don't know how to play typically with a wind-up toy. So we sat down and I said, all right, wind up the toy. And you didn't know what to do. So maybe you looked at me, maybe you did something else. And so I could either say, wind up the toy. I could pick up the toy, wind it up, let it go, and then pass it to you and say, wind up the toy. I just modeled it for you. I fully modeled it for you. I engaged in the entire behavior to hopefully provoke or evoke the correct response. I could partially do it. So let's say I wanted to fade and I wanted to back off, because every time I fully prompted it, you could get it. But we still haven't refined that relationship. I still could say, wind it up, and you wouldn't know what to do. So then I might fade and step back and just do a partial model prompt. So I would say, wind it up. You still don't know what to do. So I would pick it up and maybe I would pretend to wind it, but I wouldn't actually do it. Or I would just go to touch the wind-up toy, okay? And there are different ways that you can partially prompt something, but essentially it's just doing part of the behavior, not the entire behavior, okay? That's a model prompt. One more example. If I wanted you to sit down in a chair, okay? And again, that response isn't refined, so I said, have a seat. And you didn't sit down, I could model prompt it for you. I could go over to the chair and then I might repeat and say, have a seat, and I'd sit down. Or I would walk over to the chair and like almost sit down, but not quite, to partially model prompt sitting down for you. A physical prompt. A physical prompt is fully or partially manipulating the client's body. Okay. The model prompts are formal prompts. The physical and gestural prompts are thematic. Okay, and you can read about what thematic means. Physical prompts, again, fully or partially manipulating the client's body. So let's say we go back to that wind-up toy, and you weren't responding to the model prompts. I was winding it up, you still didn't know what to do. So then I might go to a physical prompt, and I might partially physically prompt you. So I would take one hand and have you hold the wind-up toy, and then I would hand over hand prompt you to put your fingers on the wind-up part. That would be a partial physical prompt. I'm not cranking your hand to get you to crank it. I'm hoping that by putting my fingers and putting your fingers on the little whatever you might call it, the dial, that you twist it, okay? Or a full physical prompt. I hand over hand go through the whole action after saying wind it up. I would physically prompt your hand to wind up the wind-up toy. We also would use physical prompts for something like, let's say I have 3 colors sitting in front of you, red, blue, and yellow, and I said, find the yellow. And I modeled it again, and you didn't respond to the model prompt. So then I might physically put your hand on the yellow and said, you found yellow, good job. And then I might probe it again to see, can you do it after I prompt it? So I might find the yellow to see if you can do that. And if you can't, then I might go back into that full prompt, or a partial prompt would be if I'm lifting up your wrist, maybe towards the yellow, but I don't actually put your hand or finger on the yellow. We don't necessarily always try model prompts first for some learners. If we have data to show that a student or child needs physical prompts first, and they need most to least intrusive prompts, we might always physically prompt, or we might just use physical prompts for specific skills like hand washing. We might not model that. We might actually just hand over hand wash that child's hands and then fade that to just partially by holding their wrists. I think you get it. All right. Gestural prompts is our other form of thematic prompts. Gestural prompts are responses that direct one's attention to a particular or general location. So a gestural prompt, if I were again asking you to sit down or have a seat, and you didn't necessarily respond appropriately when I said have a seat, I might put my hand on the chair or on the seat and pat the seat. Okay, that would be a full gestural prompt. Or I might just point to the chair or gesture towards the chair. It'd be a partial gestural prompt. Same thing if I'm trying to have you identify colors and I've said find the blue. We might use a gestural prompt like I might point towards the blue. What's tricky is that with that type of thing, if I were to actually touch the blue, is that a full gestural prompt, or is it a model prompt? Because it's exactly what I want you to do, which is touch the blue. So it would actually be both in that case. All right. Those are our response prompts. Let's talk about stimulus prompts here. I'm at 13 minutes. Okay. Stimulus prompts. Antecedent stimuli that evoke the correct response. Okay, if you put that on your flashcard, that's perfectly fine. Antecedent stimuli that evoke a correct response. All right. There's a product prompt. Again, this is something evokes the correct response. So a product prompt, a full or partial product of a behavior is presented. You will most commonly see this on given instructions. So let's say you bought a bed, the bed frame, and you open the instructions and you just see pictures of either the bed halfway put together, which would be a partial product, or all the way put together. And that would be your full product prompt. You're just seeing exactly what you're seeing the final product of a behavior. Now, those instructions don't have a person modeling exactly what you need to do, right? They'll show you the screws that you have to pick up, but they don't actually have a picture of someone pointing to the screw that you have to identify and then pick up, right? So that's an example of a product prompt that you'll most often see. You might also get a product prompt in a cookbook. So you are trying to put something together and there's just a picture of the final product on what your dessert that you're baking or whatever, the food that you're cooking is supposed to look like. That would be a product prompt, a full product prompt if the food's complete. All right, now we're going to talk about within stimulus prompts and extra stimulus prompts. Within stimulus prompt is altering the stimulus used in responding, okay, to get the correct response.
So within stimulus prompt, again, is manipulating the stimulus itself to get the correct response. This is better explained in the reading than I can explain for you, but sorry, I just want to make sure I tell you exactly the right words. Environmental guides can also be supplied that inform the client what is to be done. That's the product prompt that we're talking about. All right, within stimulus prompt might consist of having a brown mug for coffee and a white mug for water. Okay, so how many of you use color coding? I don't know about you, but I always used for my science classes, I always used green notebooks, green folders, green everything, because it reminded me of nature and natural science and whatnot, even though chemistry has nothing to do with green specifically. But I also, let's say your pill boxes, let's say you have a morning pill box and an evening pill box, and you use white for the morning because it's lighter, and your purple one for the evening. Your purple reminds you that that's more of an evening color or nighttime color. Okay, that is a within stimulus prompt. The stimulus itself, something about the stimulus, helps evoke the correct response. An extra stimulus prompt involves adding something to the stimulus itself, which helps evoke the correct response. So this would be while you're taking notes, if there's something in your book that you want to make sure that you read a couple times, if you highlight it or add a little star next to it or an arrow, underline it, circle it, okay, that's all an extra stimulus prompt. You're adding something supplemental to a stimulus to evoke the correct responding. The correct responding for you is to read that multiple times or memorize that specific thing. An extra stimulus prompt might also be if you are sending home an IEP, you're a teacher and you're sending home some paperwork for parents to sign, and you add a Post-it note next to where you want them to sign. A positional prompt is another type of stimulus prompt. That's altering the location of the stimulus used in responding. So let's say we're going back to our red, blue, yellow cards, and I said find yellow, and you're not accurately identifying yellow. We could use a positional prompt for you, meaning we could just move the yellow card closer to you, and then ask, find the yellow, and it's a little closer to you. And then I'd try to mix them up and then probe, find the yellow. Is that type of prompt working for you? A positional prompt, if I want to help my husband remember his coffee mug in the morning, I might position it closely to the coffee machine or bring it down to the door to make sure he remembers to grab it on his way out. That's just a positional prompt, altering the location of the stimulus used in responding. All right, a vocal prompt. Speech sounds to be reproduced. Vocal prompts, this is tricky because vocal prompts can be partial, they can be full, they can be at times gestural or model prompts. But let's just simplify it and I want you to learn what a vocal prompt is, which is just using speech sounds to be reproduced. So I'll read this a little bit. Vocal imitation is specifically imitation through product duplication. The vocal stimulus can be supplied completely. So this is also what's tricky, is that for a vocal prompt, it's not, even though it is someone producing it, it's altering the stimulus, which the stimulus is just the word itself. And I know that's kind of a brain, but the vocal prompt, if I were to say, say mama, mama, okay, that's the actual stimulus being produced. It's not adding a behavior to a stimulus to help you get the correct response. I know that's confusing. I'm not going to I'm not going to quiz you on you must identify whether a vocal prompt is a response prompt or a stimulus prompt. Okay. But a vocal prompt is speech sounds to be reproduced. For example, when teaching a baby to say mama, we might provide a full prompt by saying the complete word, say mama, mama, or we might supply a partial product. So we might say mama. Same thing. I was just on FaceTiming with my niece, who's 1.5 years old, and she was singing the ABCs. So she started A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then she kind of stopped, and I wanted her to continue. Now, I wasn't going to go H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P and sing the rest of the song for her. I went H, and I kind of started this next phrase that I wanted her to start. So that was kind of a partial vocal prompt because I wanted her to produce a significant response of the rest of the song, and I just provided part of it. An instructional prompt. So let's say I was talking to a student and we're working on a math problem, and I were to say, well, what do we do next? And which would be a hint. That's another type of prompt. Well, not really. That's just a question. What do we do next? That's more of a probe. What do we do next? And they can't answer. So I could hint at it, and I could say, you carry something. And he might say, oh, you carry the 2 up here. I'd say, great. Okay, that was a hint. That's the next prompt that we're going to talk about. Or if I said, what do we do next? And he didn't get it correct, or he didn't respond, I might say, you carry the 2. Put the 2 up here. Okay, it's an instructional prompt. In that case, it was vocal. Or I could have carried the 2 for him, a permanent written product. I also could have written out for him the steps of the math problem, and as he's working through it, he can use my written products to evoke the correct response as he's going through solving his math problem. And like I just talked about, hinting, distinctly different supplemental stimulation to evoke responses related to the correct response, okay? So hinting, if I asked a child, tell me something that you sit on, and I wanted him to say chair, but he said floor, which could be correct. I might say, well, it's got 4 legs and a back, chair, okay? It was different supplemental stimulation. I never said ch for chair. I never showed him a picture of a chair. I didn't say chair. I just hinted and gave him distinctly different supplemental stimulation to evoke the correct response. All right, there's a little grid here after that about stimulus prompts, and now let's just talk really quickly about fading. Fading is eliminating the prompts to transfer influence over responding to a typical antecedent stimulus. I know that's a long definition. Ultimately, we're eliminating prompts systematically and gradually to evoke the correct response given that typical antecedent stimulus, okay? That typical antecedent stimulus, what color, okay? Or what color is this, okay? That's your stimulus. If I wanted to fade to that, I might use, I might just use a vocal prompt and say it's yellow. What color is this? Yellow. Okay, that was a full vocal prompt. But let's say it's been 5 minutes and I asked you again, what color is this? And you said blue. I might say yeah. Okay, there's a partial vocal prompt, and you still said Yoda? Yellow. And then you said, oh, yellow. Okay, I faded those prompts. I started with a full vocal prompt, and then I backed up to yeah, you didn't get it, so then I went back up to provide a little bit more of a prompt. And over time, now you're responding to yellow. So I might go, what color is this? blue. Yellow. Okay, and you might say yellow. Good. I might have to do that a few times. And then I might say, what color is this? You might wait, and I might say, yellow. Great. Okay, so that's the process of fading and backing up on your prompts. You can do that with all types of prompts. You can even do that with product prompting, and I don't really know why you would, but you can provide fewer pictures if you really wanted to fade on a prompt. Prompt delay, systematic increase in time between typical antecedent stimulus and prompt presentation. So that's just the amount of time. If I said, what color is this? At first, if you're not responding, I can assume that you don't know the answer. So I might say yellow. Over time, I might say, what color is this? Yellow. Okay, and I might wait a little longer before presenting the prompt. That's another way of prompting, is creating more of a delay between the stimulus, what color is this, and the prompt. It's yellow, or yeah. That is all for Unit 10. I encourage you to watch this maybe a couple times since you have 2 weeks before you get quizzed on it, April 23rd, and we're really winding down already with the semester. So let me know if you have any questions at all, and I'll see you in a couple weeks.